rough standing stones, a stream meandering, delight without end, wrote the 14th century priest and garden designer Musa Soseki. How lovely, the setting for elegant play and serene pleasure. For more than 1,000 years, the Japanese garden has been a haven of tranquility and a preserve of natural beauty, a vehicle for contemplating life and a wellspring of artistic inspiration. The garden today remains a place apart, serene, symbolic, and sensual.
A place like this is a device that takes you from the world you're actually living in and removes you. It was designed to create a mood, to bring one into a state of poetic creativity.
More than being an influence on my work, gardens give me energy. They provide a kind of self-affirmation. And what I like most about gardens is that they don't exclude people, just as music must not exclude people.
One should just sit quietly and look at a garden. What you see depends on what you bring to it.
I like the gardens designed long ago by the great Zen teacher Muso. Take his name, Muso. Mu means dream in English, and so means window. Muso's name is very evocative to me. Dreams are interior, inward-looking,
インテリアとか内の内部ので嘘の窓
while windows open outward.
外に開くっていうだから2つのこう違う力
There are two different kinds of energy.
無双の庭
The gardens Muso designed have a good deal of this
無双の
tension
大した
about
庭に
them.
もそういうものが随分そういうことがあると思うんです。もちろん庭っていうのは
Of course, no matter what genius may have designed a garden, it's a living thing, and time remakes it.
西方寺の場合は
The garden at Saihoji, for instance. There was originally no moss in the garden. Now there's so much that we call it the Moss Temple.
まあそういうなんていうんでしょうこう非常にこう永遠とか
Muso seems to have allowed for the changes that time would
無
bring.
双はちゃんとやっぱ測ってた。僕なんかはまあ自分が
I'm a composer, and music is often called the art of time.
時間の芸術だって言われるんだけれどでまあ庭はどっちかっていうと
On the other hand, gardens are constructions of space. But when I'm in a garden, what impresses me most are the layers of time. Various kinds and quality of time form layers.
そうなしてるかアキュミュレートされ
They accumulate.
それで岩はほとんど
Rocks hardly change at all.
存在して
They're a stable
ところが
presence.
他の植物たちはその季
But
節によって
plants change with the seasons. They come and
な
go.
くなるかも
They die away.
そういうことを僕はオーケストラ
I try to work these elements into an orchestra.
だから非常にこう早く変化
Parts
す
that
る
change quickly,
ものとまるで変化しない
others that don't change at all,
その
like the
石のような
rocks.
常にこれがあるそれから
Enveloping it all is the earth
空
and the sky,
ねで時に
and
雨
sometimes it rains.
そういうことをまあ僕はだから
So really what I do is I design
音楽
gardens
で
with
庭を
music.
デザインしてるわけだ
You spend most of your lives in motion, working, playing sports. You assume that you're moving toward a certain goal in life. Sometimes you lose sight of whether you're actually making any progress. At such times, it's best to sit down, ichiza, to stop your movement and to rethink the path you've taken. When a garden is used as a place to pause for thought, that's when a Zen garden comes to life. When you contemplate a garden like this, it will form a lasting impression in your heart.
The priest Muso Soseki, who designed the garden at Tenryuji in the mid-1300s, composed a poem about the garden and the natural beauty that surrounds it. The sounds of the stream splash out the Buddha's sermon. Don't say that the deepest meaning comes only from one's mouth. Day and night, 80,000 poems arise one after the other, and in fact, not a single word has ever been spoken.
In Zen, we don't look outside for God or Buddha. They are within us. Where we live is the Buddha's realm, the world of the gods. That's why it must be clean and beautiful, why we work to keep it from getting soiled. We think of this world as the Buddha's realm. Paradise is where we live, so we clean it and keep it beautiful. This is the most important principle. That's why we tend our gardens so carefully and treat them with such artistry. We don't divide things simply into good and bad, right and left. There is a vagueness, a sense of ma, or space between things. That's how the universe itself is constructed. When we meditate, we can't separate ourselves from nature. It's very important. The entire universe is concentrated in a garden. The garden allows us to contemplate nature, to become one part of nature. Our approach is based on these ideas.
In the garden at Ryoanji, everything unnecessary was left out. There are only a few clusters of rocks, and lines are gravel. Philosophically, this brings up matters of Zen which I don't really care for. But if it's seen in totally modern terms, to do something in a nearly empty setting, that can be very interesting. Even doing Western theater. For example, if we were staging a Greek tragedy, it might be best to perform it on an empty set. Or Shakespeare, his plays could be done with no set at all. Something may seem to be there, even though it has been eliminated. This approach to design is widespread among the Japanese. There's a kind of abbreviation, the elimination of things. It's especially true in some Japanese gardens. I think that's the influence of the team master Rikyu, the world of mu, of emptiness.
The tea master, Rikyu, insisted on austere simplicity in the practice of tea and its related arts. In time, Rikyu's taste permeated much of Japanese culture. Centuries later, his descendants continue a practice that has been described in the following words. In my hands I hold a bowl of tea. I see all of nature represented in its green color. Closing my eyes, I find green mountains and pure water within my own heart. Silently drinking, I feel these become a part of me.
This villa, built by Emperor Go-Mizuno, is composed of the upper tea house here and the middle and lower tea houses. This whole area is referred to in that way. Not just the tea hut itself, but the entire garden is called a tea house. I think that's because the influence of tea is fundamental here. And what is that influence? It's the pursuit of that which is most simple, the most essential in human life. That's what tea practitioners are after. This garden is very different from those at Zen temples. It's another expression of the garden aesthetic. But at a fundamental level, the two approaches are quite similar. What you see in this garden is the broad face of the natural world. A Zen garden demands that you grasp all of nature in one moment, all at once. Here you are told to take your time. There's that difference. But in the end, both ask that you go beyond the garden, spiritually. That you look at the garden not merely as an object, but also as a path into the realm of the spirit. You were meant to move slowly through this garden, to enter gradually into an idealized configuration of nature, into an ideal image of nature. You would come out from Kyoto, the city, and climb up here. There were intense political struggles going on, and the people would retreat up here for a poetry gathering hosted by Go-Mizuno. And the garden was constructed so that by the time they arrived, everyone would be ready to compose their poems. When you come here into this wide open space, and hear, for example, the sound of a bird, a single bird, and the bird song echoes over the hills, it's wonderful material for poetry.
What Shugakuin does so well is to borrow the neighboring valleys and hills.
風景を借りて、で、そういうものに支えられて、あそこにこう
This makes for a friendly, intimate, gentle space.
親しみのあるこう優しい空間を作ってて、でそれに反して
In contrast, the garden at Katsura closes out the rest of the world. It's a confined space.
The design of the buildings at Katsura is very refined. Most of the lines are straight, verticals and horizontals. Perpendicular lines suggest tranquility, while diagonals tend to cause uneasiness. Katsura uses mostly verticals and horizontals. That's why it feels so calm and elegant. In some places, the lines are slightly curved or swollen. I think that's by design. If they were absolutely straight, they'd feel too rigid. People explain this in various ways, but I think the slight curve gives the line a softer feel.
When I write a piece of music, I note on the score the kind of emotion I have in mind. I may think a piece about a garden should be calm and still. But at the same time, it should be a strong calm. So I say ecstatic. One might think you can't combine the two, calm and ecstasy. But there are moments in a Japanese garden that are very still and restful, but something intensely sensual, almost erotic, is going on at the same time.
The main purpose of a garden in an inn like this is to relax the guests, to help them feel at peace. That's its most important function. The Japanese have long preferred to live in the midst of nature. To have a garden that almost flows into a room is an ideal way of living. It's best for the garden to be as natural as possible. But to create a garden that looks natural in this tighter space requires a great deal of skill. It must be made to look natural, designed to appear natural. As Rikyu said about arranging flowers, they should appear just as they do in the field. But you can't achieve that by just taking a flower and sticking it in a pot. It takes real technique to make flowers seem natural.
In arranging flowers, you remove everything that's unnecessary in order to strengthen the composition. You might think that the more material that's used, the greater the value of the composition. But the opposite is true. The less there is, the more forceful the work. In flower arrangement, and in gardens as well, the Japanese value the beauty of the line. Strength of line is what matters most. By cutting back, an organic line comes to the fore. The point is to search for that organic line. By doing so, the essence of the plant is revealed. In ikebana, it's not enough to be concerned only with the narrow, confined realm of the composition. That space only exists because there is a larger world outside. I realized that when I began arranging flowers. It was through ikebana that I became interested in gardens. In other words, I became interested in exterior space as well as interior. So I began to design some gardens. For this garden, we cut the window very low, so that guests eating dinner would see the garden by lowering their line of sight in an unusual angle. The point here was to confuse the viewer a bit. Is the garden inside, or is it outside? A garden designer named Kobori Enshu first used a low window on a garden like this about 300 years ago. It was an unusual approach, and I borrowed the idea. To me, the more magnificent the tradition, the greater the challenge it presents to us to think about our own age. After all, those gardens were designed for medieval Japan. We have to think in terms of what we can create for today's world. It would be pointless just to copy what went before.
A museum is something like the frame of the painting. The artist provides the content, and the architect builds the frame that encases it. The building serves to protect the art and to connect it to its surroundings. The hill in back has a soft, curving line, and the sharp line of the building creates a contrast. People talk a lot about harmony with nature, but there can also be a tension with nature. That tension can create a different kind of harmony. Gardens play a key role in linking the building to the landscape around it. By asking the sculptor Isamu Noguchi to design this garden, we knew we would get a garden that bridges the building and the natural surroundings. Since Isamu was a friend of Ken Domon, his participation would enhance the commemorative meaning of the building. When Noguchi designed this garden, he didn't focus on the central sculpture. Never mind that, he'd say. It's just a stone. That's the easy part. What's difficult is to understand the entire space and to decide where and how to place the elements. This garden was designed by Hiroshi Teshigahara on the theme of flow. It's the first garden he designed. It's like a painting that fills the far wall, and it also serves to link the building to the surrounding environment. For materials, it uses river stones from the nearby Mogami River and dwarf bamboo that is long grown on these hillsides. The placement of the rocks makes wonderful use of the space between the hill and the building. Of course, there's no water, but as you gaze at the garden, you almost seem to hear the sound of running water. This garden was completed along with the building 7 or 8 years ago, and as time passes, it becomes more of a piece with the building and more unified with the surroundings. It's becoming a fine garden.
Most of the gardens built these days are copies. I think what we need instead is true creativity. We've gradually lost the will to take radical risks. We just follow patterns. This is true not just of gardens, but in flower arranging as well. I think this is the result of the fact that form has taken priority and creativity has suffered. We need to tear apart those patterns and look at the possibilities. We should be rethinking the garden in the context of modern architecture.
Within its limits, the Japanese garden swims, remarked the sculptor Isamu Noguchi. It works, it navigates, it floats within the imagination of the people who experience it. We are a landscape of all we have seen, Noguchi said. Can we really recreate nature, or do we go on and do something other?